The plan felt like a stain on the air. Robb Stark listened while rain ticked on canvas and the lanterns threw uneasy light across the map. The twins was behind them, chained and branded and swearing vengeance in stone. Harrenhal was ahead, black teeth in the distance. Between those places, the riverlands lay broken, and a man with a pink cloak moved through it like a quiet disease. Roose Bolton will come if he thinks he can control the shape of the meeting, Yohn Royce said, dagger tip tapping the parchment. So we give him a shape that looks safe. Brynden Tully snorted. Safe, he muttered, and the word came out like an insult. Nothing's safe. Safe enough, Robb corrected, his voice low. He had not raised it much since the twins. When he did, it always sounded like he was forcing something down inside himself. We send the summons as if it's routine. Counsel. Strategy. A king meeting his lord. If he refuses, he admits the truth. If he comes, he walks into our hands. Edmure's bandaged wrist tightened into a fist. And then we hang him, he said. Robb's jaw flexed. And then we decide, he replied. Catelyn watched her son's face and felt the old ache of knowing what a crown did to boys. It taught them to delay mercy until it became cruelty. It taught them to pretend choices were made of stone. Lyn Corbray looked up from his blade, eyes bright. If he's as clever as people pretend, he said, voice light, he'll come with knives hidden in smiles. He'll come with men who look like guards and shoot like hunters. Which is why he'll come to a place with only one road out, Brynden said, tracing with the knife. A bend, a ford, a narrow rise. Robb's hand hovered over the map. The old road near Fairmarket, he said. The stand of alder by the bank. Hills on both sides. Vale riders can hide in the trees. Northmen in the ditch. Archers up on the rise. He looked at Yohn. Your men hold the flanks. Quiet. No banners until the net closes. Yohn nodded once. Done. Catelyn's throat tightened. He will bring men, she warned. And if he suspects. He always suspects, Brynden said. That's his gift. And his weakness. He thinks everyone is a leech because he is. Robb reached for a strip of parchment, already half-written. A summons in his own hand. The seal would be direwolf wax, pressed hard enough to leave a ridge. He dipped the quill and wrote, slow and steady, as if each word were a step on thin ice. Lord Roose Bolton, I require your counsel and your presence. You will meet me under banner at... Asterisk. Catelyn watched the ink dry like blood on stone. You should not go yourself, she said softly, and hated that her voice still wanted to be gentle.
Let Brynden, let Yohain.
Robb did not look up. If I send others, he says I fear him, he replied. If I fear him, the North doubts. If the North doubts, Tywin wins. So you risk your throat, Edmure snapped. Robb's eyes lifted then, and there was a flash in them, wolf-bright, furious. I have been risking my throat since father died, he said. The difference is I am finished letting others choose the knife. Silence held for a moment, broken only by the raven's restless wings in its cage. Yohn Royce stepped closer, voice lowering. When he comes, he said, you must be prepared to do what honor hates. Robb's mouth tightened. Bind him, he said, publicly, alive. I want him alive long enough that every northern lord sees him in chains and understands this was not rumor. And if he tries to kill you first? Lyn Corbray asked, smiling faintly. Robb's gaze slid to gray wind at the tent flap. The direwolf stared back, patient and cold. Then he dies, Robb said. He finished the summons, rolled it, sealed it. The direwolf wax cooled under his thumb like a small, hard promise. Outside, rain fell on a land that had already drowned in blood. Inside, a king sent a raven that would summon a leech to the blade. Roose Bolton received the king's summons as if it were an invitation to supper. He sat in his pavilion with a low fire and a cup of watered wine, listening to rain on canvas. The direwolf seal on the letter was clean, pressed hard. Roose turned it once between his fingers, feeling the ridges, then broke it with calm precision. He read without expression. Across from him, Valda Frey sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap. She had been given to Roose as part of the old bargain. Before the twins turned into a battlefield and before Walder Frey became a chain thing howling behind stone. Valda's eyes followed Roose's face the way a mouse watches a cat, always expecting motion that would mean death. Steelshanks Walton stood behind Roose with his hands clasped, the hard lines of his face softened only by the rain light. Another Bolton captain leaned in, voice lowered. "It's a trap," the captain murmured. Roose looked up slowly. "Everything is a trap," he said. "The question is who sets it." He read the letter again, not for meaning but for tone. A king requiring counsel. A king choosing a meeting under banner. A king trying to sound steady while his world cracked. Roose's mouth twitched faintly. "He wants me to come," he said. Steelshanks Walton's eyes narrowed. "And if you do?" Roose folded the letter neatly. "Then I learn what he knows," he replied. "And what he thinks he can prove." Valda Frey swallowed, voice thin. "If he has proof," she whispered, "he will kill you." Roose's pale gaze slid to her. "He will want to," he said. "Wanting is not the same as doing." The captain's mouth tightened. "We can refuse," he urged. "Ride north. Take the road to the Trident. Join Lord Tywin outright. Why risk your neck for a boy's pride?" Roose's eyes did not warm. "Because a refusal is a confession," he said softly. "And confessions travel faster than armies." He stood, moving to the raven cage. The bird inside watched him with dark eyes, head cocked. "Send word to Harrenhal," Roose ordered. "To Lord Tywin. Tell him the king has summoned me." Steelshanks Walton hesitated. "And what do you tell the king?" Roose looked at the direwolf seal again, then at the rain beyond the canvas flap. "I tell him I obey," he said. The captain frowned. "You walk into a net." Roose turned, voice calm as falling snow. "I walk into a net with scissors," he replied. "And if the net is stronger than it looks, then I will cut a different throat on my way out." Valda Frey's hands clenched. "What will you do?" she whispered. Roose regarded her for a long moment. Then he said, almost gently, "I will bring men who can kill quietly, and men who can die loudly. I will bring gifts. I will bring apologies. And I will bring the king what he expects." "What is that?" the captain asked. Roose's mouth twitched again, not quite a smile. "A leech," he said. "He expects a leech, so I will let him see one." He reached into a small chest and took out a strip of pink cloth, thin, innocuous. He folded it, tucked it into his sleeve. "Prepare 50 riders," he ordered. "Not more. Too many looks like a threat. Too few looks like fear." His eyes sharpened a fraction. "And choose men who will not hesitate if I nod." Steelshanks Walton nodded once, already moving. Roose Bolton returned to his seat and lifted his cup of wine. The fire threw weak light across his face, revealing nothing. "Tell the king," he said softly to the rain, "that his lord comes." And somewhere beyond the wet darkness, a trap tightened its ropes around the road. In the Eyrie, words were weapons sharpened by thin air. The hall was bright with torchlight and pale banners, but the brightness did not warm anything. Men spoke softly as if afraid the sky might hear. Robert Arryn sat bundled in furs, knees drawn up, eyes too wide. He looked like a child trying to pretend he was a lord. Anya Wainwood stood near him like a tower made of bone and resolve. Nestor Royce and Maester Coleman waited to one side, their faces tight. The lords declarant were gathered in a half-circle, cloaks damp from cold, eyes hard. Petyr Baelish stood among them as if he belonged, smiling lightly, hands open, voice gentle. He made gentleness sound like reason. "My lords," he said, "the realm burns. The veil has ridden, and in riding, has made itself a target." He turned his smile toward Robert. "And targets, sadly, attract arrows." Robert flinched at the word. His small fingers clenched around the edge of his seat. "Enough," Anya said, voice even. Speak your proposal without poetry. Petyr's smile warmed. Plainly, he echoed. Plainly, the Vale should return home. A murmur ran through the lords. Some anger, some reluctant fear. And abandon allies, Anya said. And protect its lord, Petyr corrected softly, tilting his head toward Robert. Lord Robert Arryn's health has suffered. The stress of war, the danger of enemies. This is not. The doors opened. Lysa Arryn entered. She wore black, but not the wild, disheveled black of the moon door night. This black was chosen, composed. A silver ring gleamed on her finger, the mockingbird stamped into it catching torchlight. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her chin was lifted as if Petyr's hand had taught it how. The hall stilled. Robert made a thin sound and leaned forward. "Mother," he whispered. Lysa's face broke for a heartbeat, love and pain twisting together. Then Petyr's presence beside her steadied her like a hand on the back of the neck. "My lords," Lysa said, voice trembling but clear, "you have taken my son's name and used it to drag the Vale into war." Anya's eyes narrowed. "We used his name to protect his inheritance," she replied. Lysa's gaze flicked to Petyr, then back. "And now," she continued, "I reclaim my duty, as regent, as mother." She lifted a raven scroll, wax-pressed, ink-fresh. "By order of Lord Robert Arryn, the Vale's host is recalled. All banners return, all knights, all men." The hall erupted in murmurs. "Not his hand," Horton Redfort growled. "Not his mind." Petyr's voice slipped in like silk. "It is his name," he said, "and in law, name is power." Anya stepped forward. "Lady Lysa," she said, and there was no softness in it now. "You were confined because you endangered your son. You do not regain authority because you have a ring." Lysa's eyes flashed, wet with fury. "You think you can keep him from me?" she hissed. Robert's thin voice rose, frightened. "Stop," he pleaded. "Please stop." Petyr moved closer to Robert, smile tender. "No one is hurting you, my lord," he murmured. "We are only keeping you safe." Safe, the hook word. Robert trembled. His gaze flicked between his mother and Petyr and Anya as if the hall had become a cliff edge. Maester Coleman swallowed hard. "The council," he began. "Must. The council has done enough," Lysa snapped. She held the scroll higher, as if height made it truth. "The Vale comes home." Anya's hand tightened on the edge of Robert's seat. "And if we refuse?" she asked quietly. Petyr's smile did not change. "Then the crown will call it rebellion," he said softly. "And Tywin Lannister will march his engines toward your mountain gates. Your honor will become your grave." The lords shifted. Some faces hardened. Others faltered. Fear did what steel could not. Lysa's gaze found Robert. "My sweet boy," she said, voice cracking with practiced tenderness. Tell them you want your mother." Robert's throat worked. His hands trembled. He looked at Anya Waynwood, who had held him steady. He looked at Petyr Baelish, who smiled like safety. He looked at his mother, whose love had once tightened like a noose and now shimmered like a promise. "I," Robert whispered, and in that trembling, the Vale's war began to teeter. Not on swords, but on a child's frightened breath. The raven arrived in the night and made the camp colder. Jon Royce broke the seal under torchlight, and the wax left a smear across his gauntlet. Anya Waynwood's mark beneath it, and another seal pressed over it like a bruise. The mockingbird. He read once, then again. Robb watched his face, and when Jon's jaw tightened, Robb's stomach dropped. "Say it," Robb demanded. Jon handed him the parchment without ceremony. Caitlin leaned close enough to read over Robb's shoulder. The words were blunt. Lysa Arryn, restored by marriage to Petyr Baelish, had issued recall in Robert's name. The council resisted. The Vale split. Some houses would obey. Some would refuse. Anya Waynwood begged Jon to hold, to keep the main strength in the Riverlands until the council could secure Robert's authority again. Robb's hands clenched until parchment creased. "Petyr," he whispered, and the name tasted like old poison. Lyn Corbray's laugh drifted from the edge of the firelight. "The little mockingbird has grown bold," he said, eyes bright. "He thinks he can call falcons back with a ring." "Some will go," Jon said flatly, "not because they love Petyr, but because they fear the crown." Across the camp, Vale knights clustered in tense knots, voices low but sharp. Caitlin caught fragments. "My Lord Father's command, Robert's name, we cannot be traitors, we already are, my brother died at the twins." Fear and loyalty wrestled in every sentence. Robb looked up, eyes hard. "How many?" he asked. Jon's voice was steady, but it carried a weight. "If Petyr has half the lords uncertain, he can peel off a third of the host," he said. "Maybe more, if Lisa screams loud enough." Edmure Tully strode into the torchlight, bandaged wrist held stiffly. "Peel off," he snapped. "We're not a bloody orange." Brynden Tully caught his arm and shoved him back slightly. "Quiet," the Blackfish hissed. "This is how wars die. By men shouting at each other while the enemy sharpens blades." Robb stared at the recall message as if he could burn it with his eyes. "If the Vale leaves," he said, voice low, "Tywin's engines take the twins. Harrenhal holds. Bolton breathes. We lose the Riverlands. And if we disobey," Jon replied, "the Vale becomes rebel by decree. Petyr will sell that decree to Tywin like a jewel." Caitlyn's throat tightened. "Anya will fight him," she said, though the words sounded like prayer. Jon's gaze flicked to her. "She will," he agreed. "But she is one lady against a man who has made a life of turning law into a knife." Robb folded the parchment with brutal care. "Then we make our own law," he said. Jon raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Robb's gaze swept the camp. "Any Vale man who leaves now leaves through my lines," he said. "Peacefully. No blood. But every man who stays swears to you, Jon Royce, not to Lisa Arryn, until Lord Robert Arryn's authority is settled." His mouth tightened. "And we send ravens ourselves, to the Lord's declarant, to the Vale houses. We tell them the truth. Petyr Baelish is selling their honor." Lyn Corbray's smile sharpened. "And if they don't care?" he asked. Robb's eyes went wolf-cold. "Then I fight with whoever stands," he replied. "I have learned not to beg men to be brave." Grey wind growled low at the horse line, sensing the tension the way wolves sense storms. Jon Royce read the camp the way he read terrain. He saw fear in the Vale men's eyes. He saw rage in the Northmen. He saw a king trying to hold allies together with sheer will. "Then we hold," Jon said at last. His voice carried just enough steel to quiet the nearest arguments. "Those who will leave, leave. Those who will stay, stay. And we ride before Tywin can use this crack." Robb nodded once, decision hardening like ice. Behind them, in the dark, the river kept running. And far away, in the Eyrie's thin air, a child's name was being used like a rope to pull an army home. The meeting place was ordinary enough to be believable. A muddy riverbank, alder trees dripping rain, mist curling low over water like breath. Two banners planted in the mud, the dire wolf and the flayed man. So close that their cloth almost touched when the wind shifted, as if the war itself wanted to knot them together. Robb Stark stood beneath the dire wolf with Brynden at his shoulder and Caitlin just behind, her hand resting on her cloak's clasp like it could steady her heart. Grey wind crouched near Robb's boots, head low, eyes fixed on the treeline. Jon Royce was not visible. That was the point. Vale knights hid among the alders, shields dark with wet, horses held quiet, archers tucked into brush on the rise. The trap was set like a jaw held open. Roose Bolton arrived with the precision of a man who did not like surprises. 50 riders, no more. Enough to look respectful. Enough to kill a king if the road turned favorable. Roose rode at their head on a pale horse, pink cloak damp, helm off. His face was the same calm mask it had always been, as if he had never betrayed anyone in his life. He reined in at the edge of the banners and lifted a hand in greeting. "Your Grace," he said, voice soft. Robb did not return the gesture. "Lord Bolton," he replied. Roose's eyes flicked briefly to Caitlin, then away, polite, distant, as if she were a lady at court and not a mother who had survived a slaughter. "You summoned me," Roose said. "I did," Robb answered, "because I have questions." Roose inclined his head slightly. "Then ask," he said. Robb's hand tightened on the reins. "Where were you during the fighting at the Twins?" he demanded. Roose's face did not change. "Holding my men together," he replied. "When I saw the hall turn into chaos, I withdrew to preserve what strength remained. A dead lord is of no use to his king." Brynden made a sharp sound, half laugh, half cough. "Convenient," he muttered. Roose's eyes slid to him. "Pragmatic," he corrected. Robb's voice sharpened. "My rear camp was attacked," he said. "Men died. Supplies burned. Pink cloth was found on a spear." Roose's gaze remained steady. "Pink cloth can be stolen," he said. Robb reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the parchment with the flayed man's seal. He held it up where the damp light could catch the wax. Roose's eyes flicked to it, just a flicker. For a heartbeat, something tightened behind the calm. Then it smoothed again. "Explain this," Robb said. Roose did not reach for it. "A forged seal," he said softly. "A crude attempt to break trust at the moment you most need it." Caitlin felt her nails dig into her palm. He could lie with such ease. Ned would have looked away. Roose stared straight. Robb's jaw clenched. "The letter names troop movements only you could know," he said. "The hour my garrison changes at the Twins. The road my wagons travel. The message Tywin's vanguard would send." Roose's mouth twitched faintly. "Then someone watches you close." "Ly," he said. "Perhaps your enemies are more clever than you believe." Grey Wind's lips curled, a low growl vibrating through wet air. Roose's horse shifted nervously, sensing the wolf. Roose's gaze dropped to the direwolf. "An impressive beast," he murmured. "A pity if he were to be put down." Robb's eyes flashed. "Threaten him again," Robb said, voice low, "and you will not leave this bank alive." Roose's calm held. "I do not threaten," he said. "I observe." For a moment, mist thickened, and the river's sound seemed louder, as if the world leaned in to listen. Robb took one step closer, boots sinking into mud. "I trusted you," he said, and the words came out like a wound reopened. "My father trusted you." Roose's eyes remained pale and unreadable. "Trust is a tool," he said softly, "like a blade, like a crown. It must be used carefully." That was the moment Robb knew. Not because Roose confessed he never would, but because Roose spoke of trust the way a butcher spoke of meat. Robb's hand lifted slightly. In the alders, Yohn Royce's men tightened their grips, and Roose Bolton, still calm, still polite, began to smile with his eyes, just a fraction, as if he too had been waiting for the trap to close. The first arrow took a Bolton rider in the mouth and ended the lie mid-breath. The man toppled backward off his saddle, blood spraying into mist. The sound that followed was not a scream but a wet, surprised gurgle, like a man trying to swallow water and finding only death. Then the alders came alive. Vale archers loosed in disciplined volleys, shafts hissing through rain. Bolton riders shouted, raining hard, trying to form a line. Horses reared, eyes rolling, as arrows struck flanks and necks. Steel flashed, mud churned under hooves. Yohn Royce surged out of the trees with a wall of shields, bronze armor dull and terrifying. His men hit the Bolton flank like a closing door, shield rims slamming into riders' legs, knocking men down into mud where their swords became useless weight. Roose Bolton did not shout. He did not flail. He simply drew his blade, clean, practiced, and turned his horse as if he had expected this exact moment. "Your Grace," he called softly, and in the softness was mockery. "So it is war between us at last." Robb answered with steel. He rode forward, blade cutting in hard arcs, aiming not for honor but for efficiency. Grey Wind launched beside him, jaws closing on a horse's throat, dragging it down. Rider and mount hit the mud together. The rider tried to crawl away. Grey Wind ended that thought with a snap. Brynden Tully fought like a man who had waited too long to kill the right enemies. He drove into a Bolton rider, sword up beneath mail, and ripped it free with a grunt. Another Bolton man swung at him. Brynden ducked and split the man's knee, then finished him with a quick thrust to the throat. Caitlin backed toward a tree, dagger in hand, breath ragged. She was not a warrior, but she had been hunted enough to know what survival looked like. A Bolton rider broke through the chaos toward her, eyes wild, sword raised. Caitlin raised her dagger, ready to die ugly if she had to. A Vale shield slammed into the rider's horse, throwing both horse and man sideways. The rider hit the ground and did not rise. Jon Royce moved past Caitlin without looking at her, a bronze shadow doing what it had come to do. "Roose!" Robb shouted, forcing his horse through mud toward the pale lord. Roose turned smoothly, meeting Robb's charge with cold calculation. A Bolton rider tried to intercept. A Vale spear took him through the ribs and yanked him off the saddle like a sack. Roose and Robb circled for a heartbeat, wolf and leech. "You cannot hold the north without me," Roose said, voice carrying strangely calm through screams. "Half your lords fear my name more than your crown." Robb's eyes burned. "Then they will learn new fear," he snarled. Roose leaned in slightly, as if confiding. "You are young," he said. "You believe killing one traitor kills betrayal." His blade lifted, and the strike came fast, aimed at Robb's shoulder, where mail met leather. Robb barely caught it.
"Steel ran."
The force jarred Robb's arm to the elbow.
Gre.
Wind snarled and lunged toward Roose's horse. Roose's horse panicked and sidestepped, nearly throwing him. Roose recovered with the same calm he had used to betray a king. "Wolf!" he hissed, and slashed at Grey Wind's muzzle. The blade cut fur and skin. Grey Wind yelped, sharp, furious, and sprang back, blood bright on black. Robb's roar was not human. It was pure rage. He drove his horse forward, shielded by Vale men now closing in like iron jaws. Roose tried to pull away, but Jon Royce's shield wall had already cut off the easiest path. Bolton riders fought desperately, trying to carve a corridor for their lord. Vale shields kept slamming, kept closing. "Take him alive!" Jon shouted, voice like a hammer. "Alive!" A Bolton captain threw himself at Jon with a spear. Jon caught it on his shield and rammed forward, crushing the man back into mud. A Vale sword ended the captain with a downward chop. Roose saw the net. For the first time, his calm cracked, just a fraction. He turned his horse hard toward the riverbank, seeking open water and chaos as refuge. Brynden Tully anticipated it. He sprinted through mud like a man half his age and swung his sword at the horse's legs. The blade bit. The horse screamed and stumbled. Roose hit the ground hard. Mud splashed. Mist turned red where the river spray mixed with blood. Vale men were on him instantly, shields and hands in iron. Roose fought, blade flashing, cutting one man's cheek open, but there were too many. Jon Royce himself stepped in, grabbed Roose's sword arm, and twisted. Bone did not break. Roose was not given that clean release, but the blade fell. Robb rode up, chest heaving, eyes wild. Grey Wind stood beside him, bleeding from the muzzle, growling low. Roose Bolton lay in mud with Vale knees on his shoulders, his pale face spattered, his eyes still cold. He looked up at Robb and spoke softly, as if the fight had been a minor inconvenience. "Now," Roose said, "you must decide what kind of king you are." They bound Roose Bolton with rope that bit deep, because gentler knots were for men who deserved the chance to run. Bolton riders who survived were dragged into a muddy line under spear points. Some sobbed, some stared forward with blank eyes. A few glared with the stubborn hatred of men who had believed their lord's calm meant invincibility. Robb stood over Roose with his sword lowered but ready, rain running down his face. Grey Wind sat close, licking blood from his muzzle, eyes never leaving the Leech Lord. Caitlin kept her dagger in hand because her fingers refused to unclench. her heart hammered in her ribs as if trying to escape. Roose Bolton knelt in mud like a man at prayer. His pale hair clung damp to his forehead. Blood speckled his cheek. His eyes remained cold, almost curious. "You killed my men," Roose said softly, as if remarking on whether. "Good men. Loyal men." "Loyal to treason," Brynden snarled, stepping close. He wanted to kick Roose in the teeth. Catelyn could see it in every line of him. Roose's gaze slid to Brynden. "Loyal to survival," he corrected. Robb's voice was low. "You sold us," he said. "You wrote to Tywin. You fed him our movements." Roose did not deny it. That was the most frightening thing of all. How easily he could accept a truth once it had become unavoidable. "I fed him what I could," Roose said. "Because wars are won by hunger and doubt. Your father never understood that." Catelyn's breath hitched at Ned's name. Robb's jaw flexed. "Speak his name again," he warned, "and I will cut out your tongue." Roose's mouth twitched faintly. "A king's threat," he murmured. "You are learning." Lyn Corbray approached with a cut on his cheek and a bright smile that did not belong on a battlefield. "He's enjoying this," Lyn said. "That's the worst part. He thinks he's teaching you." Robb ignored him. He stared down at Roose until the rain seemed to pause around them. "You will be taken in chains," Robb said. "You will be shown to every lord who doubts. You will be proof." Roose's eyes lifted slightly. "Proof," he echoed. "And then what?" Edmure Tully stepped forward, fury blazing. "Then we hang you," he spat. "We hang you and burn your damned Dreadfort." Roose's gaze slid to Edmure. "You are emotional," he said. "It makes you predictable." Edmure's hand clenched, trembling with the desire to smash Roose's face into mud. Yohn Royce's voice cut through, steady. "We do not kill him here," he said. "Not with the Vale watching the Vale's recall. Not with Tywin's engines moving. We kill him when it helps us." Catelyn turned her head sharply. "When it helps us?" she repeated, tasting the cold practicality. Yohn's eyes met hers without flinching. "Your son must keep the North," he said quietly. "And the North will fracture if this becomes a private vengeance instead of a public judgment." Robb's shoulders rose and fell with a hard breath. He looked older than he had any right to look. Roose watched him with calm interest. "If you kill me," Roose said, "my house becomes a martyr for those who fear your crown. If you keep me, you carry a snake in your cart." His eyes flicked to gray wind. "And wolves tire." Robb's hand tightened on his sword hilt. "I do not tire," he said. Roose smiled with his eyes again. "Everyone tires," he murmured. "Even kings." Catelyn stepped forward, dagger still in hand, and forced herself to speak steadily. "You will write," she said. "You will write to every northern lord. You will confess." Roose's gaze slid to her. For a heartbeat, something like amusement warmed his coldness. "Confessions can be forged," he said. "You know that." Catelyn's throat tightened. "Then you will write in your own hand," she said. "And you will seal it. And we will send your own men as witnesses." Yohn Royce nodded once. "We will," he agreed. Roose's calm held. "And when Tywin comes?" he asked softly. "When he takes the twins because your falcons fly home. When your allies become frightened birds." Robb's eyes flashed. "Then he bleeds," Robb said. "And if the Vale leaves, I bleed him harder." Roose studied him for a long moment. Then he said, almost kindly, "That is the right answer." Lyn Corbray shivered with delight. "Gods," he murmured. "What a night." Robb turned away from Roose, because looking at him too long felt like letting poison sit on the tongue. "Bind him tighter," Robb ordered, "and send ravens. Every lord, every hall. I want the North to read the truth before Tywin can buy a lie." The river ran fast behind them, dark and indifferent. Roose Bolton knelt in mud and watched the king he had tried to kill begin to understand that victory was not only a battle. It was a story told faster than an enemy could rewrite it. Tywin Lannister did not waste time mourning failed plans. He came to the twins the way winter came, inevitable, methodical, cruel. On the east bank, siege engines rose in ugly silhouettes. Trebuchets with arms like bent giants, scorpions aimed at tower slits. A battering ram dragged toward the gate under a roof of wet hides. Red cloaks moved in disciplined blocks through mud, men chanting to keep rhythm as they hauled wood and iron into place. Sir Adam Marbrand rode the line, shouting orders, his voice sharp. Behind him, the black bulk of Ser Gregor Clegane moved like a shadow, too large to look human, his presence turning men's courage into something brittle. Across the river, the twins' towers bristled with defenders.
Vale shields lined batementes.
Northmen crouched behind stone with bows. Pitch pots waited like black teeth. The bridge itself was choked with barricades. Wagons overturned, timbers braced, every inch prepared to make the crossing a slaughter. Edmure Tully stood on the bridge tower with rain on his hair and anger in his spine. He looked less like a lord who had been bound to a chair and more like a man who had finally found something worth dying for. "Hold!" he shouted down the line. "Hold until they choke." The first stones flew. A trebuchet arm swung, and the air screamed as a boulder arced toward the western tower. It struck with a crash that shuddered through stone. Dust burst outward. Men on the battlement staggered, coughing. Another stone followed, then another, each impact like a fist hammering a door. Fire arrows streaked in, hissing through rain. Some died in wet air. Some struck wood and caught. Smoke rose, thin and black. A scorpion bolt punched into a shield and drove a Vale knight backward. The knight fell with a cry, shield pinned to his chest by the thick shaft. Men hauled him away, blood trailing. "Archers!" Edmure roared. "Windows! Kill the hands!" Vale bowmen loosed, arrows thudding into red cloaks on the far bank. A Lannister man toppled off the ram roof. Another stumbled and was trampled under the ram's weight. The attack did not stop. Tywin's men did not stop. That was the point. Inside one of the towers, Walder Frey watched through a slit window, chains on his wrists, his face twisted with impotent hatred. His house was being fought over like a carcass, and he could do nothing but snarl. On the battlements, a Vale captain shouted, "They're bringing ladders!" Ladders rose from the mud, shoved forward by men hunched under shields. Northmen met them with axes, chopping wood, pushing them back into the river's drop. One ladder tipped. Men screamed as they fell, splashing into churning water. Gregor Clegane bellowed from the east bank, and his men surged harder, as if his roar could make them immortal. The ram hit the gate with a dull, brutal thud. Again. The gate shuddered. Iron hinges screamed. Wood splintered. Edmure's face twisted. "Pitch!" he screamed. Pitch pots tipped. Black L. Liquid poured down onto the ram roof. A torch followed. Flame bloomed, sudden and hungry. Men beneath the roof screamed, dropping the ram handles as fire licked through seams. Some ran. Some were shoved back by officers' swords. Marbrand shouted, forcing them forward again. The ram hit the gate even as it burned. The twins held, for now. But holding was not winning. Holding was bleeding slowly while an enemy measured how much blood you had. A raven lifted from the western tower and vanished into gray sky, carrying desperate ink toward the host that had ridden away. Robb Stark was not here to see the stones strike. Not here to hear the gate groan. Tywin Lannister counted on that. And on the far bank, beneath red banners and gray rain, he prepared to break the twins open like a lesson carved into wood. The raven reached them at noon, breathless with ink. Robb broke the seal with fingers still stained faintly red from the riverbank fight. He read once and his face went still. He read again, and something behind his eyes turned to iron. Catelyn leaned in, stomach tightening before she saw the words. Tywin Lannister has begun siege. Stones falling. Gate struck. Fire on the bridge. Hold uncertain. The twins. Robb's hand crumpled the parchment. Then he forced it flat again as if crushing paper would not help. Jon Royce stepped closer, reading the message from Robb's posture alone. He came, Jon said. He came, Robb echoed, voice flat. And he's breaking my bridge while I stand here with a leech in chains. Roose Bolton sat bound to a wagon axle nearby, rope cutting into his wrists, his pale face composed. He watched the exchange as if listening to a lesson being taught. You hear that? Robb snapped, turning toward him. Your new king throws stones at my men. Roose's mouth twitched faintly. Tywin Lannister is not my king, he said softly. Not yet. Lyn Corbray's laugh was sharp and humorless. He means it, Lyn murmured. Gods, he truly means it. A knot of Vale knights argued near the horse line, voices tight, gestures sharp. Some held recall parchments. Some refused. A few were already turning their horses east, faces grim with fear and duty tangled. The recall is working, Catelyn whispered, seeing it with a mother's dread. Petyr's rope pulling men away one by one. Jon's jaw tightened. Not fast enough, he said. But it will hurt. Robb looked at the departing knights and then at the horizon, where a thin smear of smoke rose. Battle smoke, siege smoke, the twins calling like a wound reopening. Gray wind limped beside him, the cut along his muzzle crusted, his shoulder stiff. The dire wolf still growled at Roose whenever the Leech Lord shifted, as if the wolf could smell betrayal through rope. Brynden Tully rode up, mud splashed to his knees. We can turn back, he said bluntly. Ride hard. Hit Tywin's siege line before he settles. A relief strike. And leave Roose, Edmure demanded, riding in behind, eyes blazing. Leave him alive? Robb's jaw flexed. The choice was a knife with two edges. Revenge or survival. Proof or speed. Jon Royce's voice was steady. We take Roose with us, he said. Or we kill him now and carry his head as proof. Catelyn flinched, not because she pitied Roose, but because killing him now would be an answer too simple for the war they were in. Robb stared at Roose for a long moment. If I kill you, he said softly, your men scatter, your house becomes a story. If I keep you, you are leverage. His eyes narrowed. You like leverage, don't you? Roose's gaze met his. Leverage is survival, he said. Robb's mouth tightened. Then you will help me survive, he said. He turned to his captains, voice rising. We ride for the twins, he ordered. Now, no rest, no comfort. Vale those who stay stay to the end. Those who go, go. And may the gods judge you for what you abandon. Some Vale men stiffened. Some looked away. Robb swung into his saddle and leaned down to Grey Wind, pressing his forehead briefly to the direwolf's wet fur. Hold, he whispered. Hold together. Grey Wind huffed, a low, steady sound. Behind them, Roose Bolton sat bound to the wagon and watched the host turn like a blade toward the siege smoke. He said nothing, but Catelyn saw the faintest satisfaction in his eyes, as if even captured, he could still pull the war's strings by forcing a king to choose between two bleeding fronts. Dusk turned the river into a strip of bruised metal. Smoke clung low over the water. Firelight flickered along the towers where defenders still held, stubborn and exhausted. The gate was splintered, blackened. The ram had struck it until the wood began to look like meat. On the east bank, Tywin Lannister stood among his engines with his cloak dry beneath a canopy, as if rain respected him. His posture was the same as always, hands behind his back, face carved from certainty. Ser Gregor Clegane loomed nearby like a black pillar, great sword resting on his shoulder, blood drying on his armor from some earlier cruelty. Tywin watched the gate. He watched the bridge. He watched the tower slits where arrows still snapped out. Then he saw movement on the distant road. Banners, dire wolf, falcon, bronze runes. A ripple ran through the Lannister line. Officers shouted. Men shifted, tightening ranks. Tywin's eyes narrowed, not with surprise, but with calculation. Relief had come sooner than he wanted. On the battlements, Edmure Tully saw it too. He raised his sword high, and the defenders' tired cheers cracked the smoke like a thin beam of light. Robb Stark's host crested the rise, mud to the knees, faces grim, horses lathered. They did not arrive like heroes. They arrived like men who had been run raw by necessity. Catelyn rode near the front, eyes fixed on the burning gate, heart pounding with relief and dread tangled together. She saw bodies on the east bank, red cloaks scattered. She saw the siege engines, the stones, the ladders, the black smear of pitch where men had burned. And she saw Tywin Lannister, calm as a god. Robb reined in hard enough to make his horse snort. His gaze locked across the river at the Lion Lord. For a heartbeat, the war became two men looking at each other over water and smoke. Yohn Royce rode up beside Robb, bronze armor flecked with mud. "We hit the engines first," Yohn said. "Break his teeth." Brynden Tully's voice was a growl. "And we hit his morale. Drive them into the river." Behind them, a wagon rolled with a chained figure bound to it. Roose Bolton. Tywin's gaze flicked, sharp, and for the first time that evening his face changed, only a fraction. Recognition, interest, anger held under control. Robb saw it and felt the cold satisfaction of a king who had brought proof to the battlefield. "You wanted the North bought and delivered?" Robb shouted across the water, voice carrying in the damp air. "Here's your merchant." Roose Bolton lifted his pale face and said nothing. Tywin did not answer. He did not need to. His engines spoke for him, and his soldiers moved at his command. A horn blared from the east bank. Lannister men surged to the bridgehead, shields up, spears angled. The ram roof shifted as men prepared to drag it forward again. Scorpions turned, aiming toward the arriving host. On the west bank, Vale and Northmen moved into position instinctively, as if their bodies remembered how to fight Tog. Ether even when their minds were frayed. Shields rose, archers knocked, horses stamped. Above, ravens swirled in the smoke, black against a sky turning red with the last light. Catelyn looked at her son's face and saw something hard settle into place. No boy left. Only a king who had survived a wedding meant to kill him and now stood before the lion that had paid for it. Robb lifted his sword. "Hold the bridge," he ordered, voice steady. "Break the engines. And if Tywin Lannister wants the twins..." He pointed the blade across the river like a verdict. "Then he can try to take it from me in daylight." The battle lines tightened. Smoke curled. Steel waited. And on the far bank, Tywin Lannister's eyes narrowed as he measured not only the host before him, but the chained traitor behind it, and began to decide which price he would pay to keep the realm under his hand. The river between them looked like it had been forged from old bruises. Dark metal, slick with rain, rippling under smoke. The twins held, but it held like a jaw clenched around a broken tooth. Every groan of the gate, every crack of stone, felt like something in the world giving way. Robb Stark sat his horse at the bridgehead and let Tywin Lannister look at him. He did not wave. He did not posture. He simply existed, alive where he had been paid to die, and that alone was a kind of insult. On the far bank, Tywin stood beneath a canopy as if weather knew better than to touch him. His men moved in disciplined lines, hauling, aiming, resetting. Siege engines were not weapons so much as statements. "I have time and I have the realm's weight." Edmure Tully shouted from the tower, voice hoarse. "Archers, hold your lines. Don't waste arrows on shields." His blade rose when men faltered, not to threaten them, but to remind them they were not yet defeated. Yohn Royce leaned close to Robb, bronze runes dull under soot. "He'll test you," he said, a probing push. "He wants to see if you're exhausted enough to crack." Robb's eyes stayed on Tywin. "Then he'll learn," Robb said. A horn sounded from the east bank. The battering ram shifted under its wet-hide roof, men bracing to drag it forward again. Scorpion crews adjusted their aim toward the bridge where wolf and falcon banners hung heavy with damp. Robb lifted his sword and pointed across the water like a verdict. "You want the twins?" he shouted, voice carrying in the thick air. "Come and take it." Tywin did not answer. Answers were for men who needed them. Instead, a scorpion bolt launched with a savage snap and screamed across the river. It struck the bridge parapet, shattering stone in a burst that sent chips flying. A Vale knight flinched, then steadied, shield rising higher. "Shields up," Brynden barked. "Eyes on the damned windows." Grey wind growled low, hackles rising, as if the castle itself smelled wrong. The direwolf's muzzle still bore a cut from Roose Bolton's blade, crusted and angry, and the sight of it made Robb's grip tighten on his reins. Behind Robb, the wagon rolled forward a yard, and the chains clinked. Roose Bolton sat bound, pale face spattered with mud, eyes unreadable. He did not beg. He did not curse. He watched Tywin's engines the way a man watched a tide, weighing whether it would drown him or carry him somewhere useful. Robb turned his head just enough to let Roose see his expression. "You built this," Robb said, voice low. "You and Fry and Lion Gold. You built a knight meant to end me." Roose's mouth twitched faintly. "Wars end men," he replied. "You are simply hard to end." Robb's eyes flashed, and he leaned toward Jon. "We don't sit here while he bites," Robb said. "Not again. Not after the twins. We take the teeth." Jon's gaze sharpened. "A sortie," he said. "A raid," Robb corrected. "Tonight, while he thinks we're too tired to move." He looked up at the darkening sky. "We burn the engines. We break the ram. We kill whoever commands the lines." His eyes slid toward the black bulk of Gregor Clegane. "And if the mountain comes to meet us, we make sure he doesn't return." Jon nodded once, approval grim. "Then we need silence," he said. "And speed." Robb lowered his sword. The gesture was small, but it rippled through his men like an order. Shields tightened. Archers stopped wasting breath on curses and saved it for the fight. Across the river, Tywin's lines kept moving, patient as stone. Between them, dusk thickened, and the twins waited, half broken, half defiant, while a king prepared to strike in the dark. Night made everything smaller. The towers, the river, the men inside them. It also made every sound louder. A dropped buckle sounded like a bell. Cough sounded like betrayal. In the western tower's inner yard, torches were kept low and covered, their light trapped under cloaks. Robb stood with Jon Royce and Brynden Tully over a rough sketch scratched into damp parchment. Trebuchet positions, scorpion angles, the ram's shelter, the tents where officers slept. "Here," Brynden said, knife tapping. "Marbrand's men are thickest near the left engine line. Tywin keeps his command closer to the center under canopy. He won't move unless the whole bank burns." "We don't need him to move," Robb said. "We need his engines dead." Jon Royce's voice was steady. "We go upstream," he said. "Small boats, quiet crossing. Then we hit from behind, where shields are lazy." Edmure strode in and out of torch shadow like a man trying to keep his anger from turning into stupidity. "I'll hold the bridge," he promised, bandaged wrist tight around a sword hilt. "If the gate breaks while you're gone, I'll die on it before I let it open." Robb looked at him, and for the briefest moment something softened, gratitude, perhaps. Then the king returned. "You won't die if you can help it," Robb said. "You hold long enough for us to make the East Bank scream." Caitlin stood near the wall, watching men prepare. Her hands were cold despite the torch heat. She recognized the look in Robb's eyes now, a look Ned had worn when he went to face Jaime Lannister in the street. Acceptance, not fear. The difference was that Robb had learned acceptance could not be clean. "You're going," she said quietly. Robb did not pretend otherwise. "I have to," he replied. "They won't commit if it's only Brynden. They'll think it's a raid. If I'm there, they'll think it's the start of something worse." His mouth tightened. "Fear works both ways." Lyn Corbray tightened the strap of his helm and smiled as if the night were a feast laid out for him alone. "I'll find the ram," he said. "I've always wanted to see a lion burn up close." Jon's gaze flicked to him. "Do not chase glory," he warned. Lyn's grin widened. "I chase outcomes," he lied. Men moved like shadows. Vale knights with blackened faces. Northmen with axes wrapped in cloth to keep metal from clinking. A few carried oil skins and tinder, the ugly tools of siege breaking. Others carried hooks for cutting rope and tipping ladders, because war was as much carpentry as it was blood. At the river stairs, small boats waited under canvas. The river's smell rose thick and cold. Gray wind paced, ears flat, sensing danger that had nothing to do with arrows. He watched the boats with distrust, then watched Robb with the fierce loyalty of an animal that had decided this one human was its pack. Robb crouched and pressed his forehead briefly to gray winds, as if borrowing steadiness. "Quiet," he whispered. "When it starts, you go for legs, not THR. Drag them down, make them fall." Gray wind huffed, a low sound like agreement. Brynden stepped close to Robb, voice low enough for only him. "If you see Tywin," he said, "do not chase him. Don't let him make you reckless." Robb's eyes stayed hard. "I won't chase," he promised. "I'll burn." Jon lifted a hand, and the men fell still. "Now," he said. The boats slid into the river with barely a ripple. Oars dipped slow. The twins behind them held its breath. And in the dark, Wolf and Falcon began to cross the water that Tywin Lannister thought belonged to him. They came out of the reeds like the river had birthed them. Boots sank into wet grass. Rain pattered on helms. The siege line smelled of sweat and oil and wet hides. Men trying to keep flame out, never imagining flame would come from behind. Jon Royce lifted 2 fingers. Vale men spread, a disciplined fan of steel moving through shadow. Northmen slipped between tents, axes wrapped until the last moment. Robb moved with them, sword low, breath controlled, his world narrowed to targets. Ropes, beams, men with torches. The first kill was quiet. A sentry turned too late, mouth opening. Gray wind hit him, dragging him down into mud. The man's scream died in the wolf's jaws. Then fire. A Northman splashed oil along a trebuchet's frame. A Vale knight struck flint. The flame took, hesitant at first in the rain, then greedy as if remembering what it was made for. The trebuchet's ropes smoked, then snapped with a sound like a throat tearing. Shouts erupted. Men stumbled out of tents, half-dressed, eyes wide. "Raid!" someone screamed. "Raid!" Ser Adam Marbrand burst into torchlight near the central line, sword drawn, face hardening fast. He was not Tywin, but he was no fool. He shouted orders that made men stop running and start forming. "Shields! Form up! Protect the engines!" Robb saw him and felt the cold focus of a man who had finally been given a name worth cutting. He drove forward with 3 Vale knights at his shoulder. Arrows snapped from the darkness, Northmen in the brush. A Lannister man dropped with a shaft in his eye. Another stumbled as an arrow took his thigh. Marbrand turned, recognizing the direwolf pin, the wolf itself snarling at Robb's side. His eyes widened, then narrowed. "So you came," Marbrand said, voice rough with disbelief. Robb answered with steel. Their blades met, rang, slid. Marbrand fought well, trained, disciplined, his strikes measured. Robb fought like a man who had survived a wedding designed to murder him. He did not duel for pride. He cut for openings. Marbrand tried to circle. A Vale shield slammed into his side, throwing him off balance. Robb's blade kissed Marbrand's forearm, drawing a line of blood. Marbrand snarled and drove a thrust at Robb's ribs. Robb turned it aside by a hair and stepped in close, shoulder to shoulder, the intimacy of killing. "You came to free Fry," Robb said, voice low. "Here's your freedom." He wrenched Marbrand's sword arm down and drove his blade through Marbrand's mail where it gaped at the armpit. Marbrand's breath left him in a choked sound. His eyes went wide, then strangely calm, as if he had always known how men like him died, in mud, not in songs. Robb ripped the blade free. Marbrand fell. Around them, the siege line unraveled. Scorpion crews tried to swivel their weapons, but Northmen were already on them. Axes chopping at cranks, cutting bowstrings, spilling bolts into mud. A scorpion fired once into darkness, useless, then was set aflame when a Vale knight shoved a torch into its oiled housing. Lyn Corbray sprinted toward the battering ram, laughter sharp in his throat. He climbed the ram roof like a cat, slashed at wet hides and poured oil into seams. A torch followed. Flame bloomed under rain, stubborn and furious. Men beneath the roof screamed as fire found their hair, their cloaks, their fear. Tywin's line tried to rally. Officers shouted. Men formed ranks. But ranks meant nothing when engines burned behind you and wolves were in your tents. Robb raised his sword, voice carrying. "Back to the river," he shouted. "Burn them and go." They had come to break teeth, not to chew the whole lion. Now the lion's jaw snapped in panic, and wolf and falcon slipped away, leaving fire as their signature. Gregor Clegane arrived like a nightmare that had learned to wear armor. He came through smoke with a roar that shook men's courage loose from their bones. His black plate gleamed wet. His great sword looked too heavy for any human arm, and yet it moved as if it were made of air. Lannister men surged behind him, drawn by the certainty that the mountain meant safety. That certainty lasted only as long as his sword could reach. He swung once and split a Northman from shoulder to hip. The man fell in two pieces, steam rising from his blood in the rain. A second swing smashed a Vale shield so hard the knight behind it staggered, arm numbed to uselessness. "Back!" Yohn Royce roared. "Don't feed him!" Vale knights formed a half-moon of shields, trying to contain the giant without being crushed. Gregor laughed, an ugly sound, and slammed into the shield arc like a battering ram made of flesh. Shields buckled. Men grunted, feet sliding in mud. Robb saw Gregor's visor turn toward him and felt the cold certainty of being recognized. The mountain remembered the boy king whose war still refused to die. "Stark!" Gregor bellowed, voice thick with relish. Grey wind snarled and lunged at Gregor's horse. The horse reared, terrified, but Gregor did not lose his seat. He chopped downward at the wolf with savage precision. Grey wind sprang back, the blade shaving fur, missing flesh by a breath. Robb's throat went tight with rage. "Not him," he growled and drove forward. Gregor swung for Robb's head. Robb ducked, felt wind and death pass over him. He slashed at Gregor's knee where plate met leather. The blade skated, sparked, bit shallow. Not enough. Gregor's boot slammed into Robb's chest, knocking him backward into mud. The impact stole breath. The world narrowed to rain and smoke and the taste of iron. He rolled as Gregor's greatsword slammed down where his head had been, burying itself in mud with a wet thunk. Robb surged up and stabbed at the gap beneath Gregor's arm, where Lyn Corbray had made him bleed before. "Steel met flesh." Gregor roared, fury erupting. Lyn Corbray appeared near the flames, face lit gold and red, grin bright with madness. "He bleeds!" he shouted, delighted. "The mountain bleeds!" Gregor turned toward Lyn and raged. That was the mistake. Yohn Royce's voice cut through the smoke. "Now!" A Vale knight drove a spear into Gregor's horse's flank. Another slammed a shield into its shoulder. The horse screamed, stumbled, legs sliding on churned mud. Gregor tried to wrench it upright by brute force. Grey wind seized the horse's throat. Teeth sank. The horse's scream turned into a choking, horrible sound. Collapsed. Gregor hit the ground hard, the impact sending mud splashing. For a heartbeat, he was simply a man in too much armor in a world full of knives. Vale shields slammed down, pinning him. Spears jabbed for joints. A Northman swung an axe at the back of Gregor's knee, trying to cut tendon. Gregor roared and heaved, throwing. A shield off as if tossing a blanket. He crushed a man's skull with his gauntlet, bone cracking like dry wood. He seized a spear shaft and snapped it. Robb stepped in close, breathing hard, and aimed for the throat slit. Gregor's gauntlet caught the blade, stopping it inches from his visor. The force shoved Robb back again. Gregor's head snapped toward him, eyes burning behind black slits. "Boy!" Gregor growled. Robb spat mud. "Monster," he answered. Then Yohn Royce drove the butt of his spear into Gregor's helmet with all the strength of the mountains behind him. The blow rang like a bell. Gregor's head jerked. The visor slit wavered. Robb struck. His blade found the gap, slid in. Not deep enough to kill cleanly, but deep enough to steal breath. Gregor's roar turned into a rasp. Vale men surged tighter, shields and steel closing like a coffin lid. For the first time, the mountain's strength looked less like certainty and more like thrashing against the inevitable. Robb wrenched his sword free. "Leave him," he shouted, voice raw. "We're not dying here." They pulled back in disciplined bursts, leaving Gregor in mud and pain, leaving smoke and burning wood as their answer. Gregor Clegane did not die. He did not deserve that release. But he bled in the rain while Wolf and Falcon slipped into darkness, and the memory of it would haunt every red cloak who had ever believed monsters could not fall. Retreat was not running. Retreat was living long enough to strike again. They reached the river with smoke behind them and horns rising on the east bank like angry beasts. Arrows hissed out of the darkness, striking water with sharp splashes. One shaft thunked into a boat's side and quivered. "Row!" Yon Royce bellowed, voice like stone. "Row or die here." Vale men bent to oars, muscles burning. The boats surged forward, water slapping hard against wood. Wounded men groaned, clutching bleeding limbs. A young squire stared at his own blood with the stunned disbelief of someone seeing mortality for the first time. Robb sat low in the lead boat, breath ragged, a cut on his brow streaming down his cheek. He pressed cloth to it without looking, eyes fixed on the dark shape of the twins ahead, home, fortress, prison, all at once. Gray wind swam beside the boat, powerful strokes cutting through water. His eyes stayed on the east bank, ears flat, as if daring arrows to try him. A bolt splashed near his muzzle. The wolf did not flinch. Brynden stood in the rear boat, bow in hand, shooting back into shadow. He loosed, drew, loosed again, each arrow a small act of spite. "Come on then," he snarled into the night. "Come and die in the water." A Lannister arrow struck a rower's shoulder. The man cried out and nearly dropped the oar. Yon shoved a shield over him without thinking, catching the next shaft with a dull thud. Lyn Corbray laughed through blood, gripping the boat's edge. "They're angry," he said brightly. "That means we did it right." "Save your breath," Robb muttered. "You'll need it to keep bleeding." Lyn's grin widened. "I always bleed," he replied. "It's the only way people remember me." The boats hit the west bank hard. Men spilled out, dragging wounded, hauling oars, stumbling on slick stones. Vale shields rose as archers on the battlements fired into darkness, covering their return. Arrows streaked from the towers and thudded into the east bank's mud. Edmure met them at the river stairs, face smeared with soot and exhaustion. "Did you?" he began. "Engines burned," Yon answered before Edmure could finish. "Scorpions crippled. Marbrand dead." Edmure's eyes widened, savage satisfaction blooming. "Dead," he echoed. Robb forced himself upright, swaying slightly. He looked toward the east bank where flames still licked at broken wood. The siege line was chaos now. Men shouting, officers trying to restore order, the ram roof smoldering where Lyn had set it alight. Tywin would rebuild. Tywin always rebuilt. But rebuilding took time, and time was blood. Robb climbed the steps 2 at a time despite his injuries, because a king could not limp in front of men who needed him hard. Gray wind shook water from his fur and followed, dripping, snarling softly at any hand that reached too close. On the battlements, Robb stared across the river at the smoke and the moving red cloaks. He imagined Tywin's face when he learned Marbrand was dead. Indeed, the mountain was bleeding. He imagined the calculation, the tightening of the jaw, the silent decision to pay a different price. "Good," Robb whispered, not in relief but in grim satisfaction. "Pay it." Behind him, men groaned, fires crackled, and the twins held, shaken, cracked, but still upright. They turned the feast hall into a war room because it was the only way to cleanse it. Where music had played, maps lay spread. Where wine had spilled, candles burned. Where men had died choking on betrayal, maesters wrote names in neat script as if ink could stitch the world back together. Robb stood at the table with a bandage across his brow and blood dried at his collar. He spoke without flourish. He did not need it now. Survival had made him credible. Tywin's line is shaken, Brynden said, knife tapping the east bank. Engines burned. Marbrand dead. Men scared. He looked up. But he'll hit the gate again at first light. He wants a win he can show the realm. Edmure slammed his fist down. Let him hit, he snarled. Let him break his hands on our stone. And while he hits, Jon Royce said, we starve him, we strike supply. We make him choose between keeping his siege fed and keeping his pride intact. He looked at Robb. But we need the Vale hole for that. Robb's gaze flicked to the parchment with Anya Waynwood's seal. The recall was still a noose, even if it hadn't tightened fully. We keep whoever stays, Robb said, and we send ravens faster than Petyr can. His mouth tightened. Truth isn't enough. It has to arrive first. Roose Bolton sat in chains against a pillar, pale face calm, eyes watching as if he were an invited guest. The sight of him there, present, silent, poisonous, made Catelyn's stomach turn. You, Robb said abruptly, turning toward him. Right. Roose lifted his gaze. What would you like me to write? He asked, soft as silk. The truth, Robb snapped. Your bargain with Tywin. Your promise. Your betrayal. He stepped closer until Roose had to tilt his head up. And you seal it. In your own wax. In your own hand. Roose's mouth twitched. Truth is a malleable thing, he murmured. Robb's sword was out before Roose finished the sentence. The blade's point kissed Roose's throat, not cutting, just promising. Right? Robb repeated, and the word was no longer a request. For the first time, Roose's calm wavered, just a fraction, like a thin sheet of ice cracking under weight. He looked past Robb toward Jon Royce, as if seeking the old rules of courtesy. Jon's face was stone. Right, he echoed. Brynden slid parchment and quill across the table. You can be clever while you bleed, he said, or you can be clever with ink. Roose's eyes returned to Robb. If I write, he said softly, you kill me anyway. Robb's voice dropped. If you write, you might live long enough to be judged by northern lords, he said. If you refuse, you die tonight and your house becomes a rumor. His eyes hardened. Choose. Roose stared at him, weighing. Then he nodded once, slow. They brought him to the table in chains. His hands shook only slightly as he took the quill. He began to write with neat, precise strokes, as if writing were prayer. Names formed under his hand. Tywin Lannister, Walder Frey, Harrenhal, Warden of the Nor, Taich Ramsay Snow. Catelyn felt cold spread through her as she watched Ramsay appear on the page. A ghost of the North's future, written in ink. Edmure leaned in, eyes blazing. Good, he whispered. Good. Let every lord see it. Lyn Corbray watched with an expression that might have been admiration, or hunger. He writes nicely, Lyn murmured. Almost makes me forgive him. No, Catelyn said, voice sharp enough to cut. Nothing forgives this. Robb did not look away from the page until Roose finished. Roose pressed his seal into wax with slow deliberation, as if sealing his own coffin. Robb took the letter, held it up so the hall could see. Make copies, he ordered the maesters. Send ravens to every northern seat, every river lord, every Vale lord who still has a spine. His voice hardened. No one will say they didn't know. Roose Bolton leaned back against his chains, pale eyes calm again. But now there was something else in them. Acceptance, perhaps, or calculation shifted to a new angle. He had written the truth. Now the war would decide what truth was worth. The Eyrie did not understand smoke. It understood only wind. Morning light poured into the high hall, cold and merciless. The Vale lords stood in divided clusters, some near Anya Waynwood with faces set like stone, others nearer Petyr Baelish with eyes cautious and fearful, weighing what side would keep their children alive. Robert Arryn stood between worlds. He trembled beside Anya, furs hanging off his small shoulders, hands shaking. He looked too small to carry any decision. That was why Petyr had chosen him. Lysa stood close behind Robert, one hand on his shoulder, the other clutching the recall scroll. Tears streaked her face, but her chin was lifted, Petyr's lesson in posture made visible. Petyr Baelish smiled gently, palm resting against Lysa's back as if he were steadying her. His eyes moved over the hall, counting, measuring, placing invisible coins on invisible scales. Maester Coleman entered with a raven message in his trembling hands. The wax seal was unfamiliar in this hall. Flayed man pressed into dark wax beside Direwolf. The room went quiet. Anya stepped forward and took the parchment, eyes scanning fast. Her face did not change. That was how Catelyn Stark's sister's allies were made, with controlled fury. She held the parchment up. "A confession," she said, voice clear. Petyr's smile faltered by a fraction. Lysa's eyes widened. Anya read, Roose Bolton's own hand, naming Tywin Lannister, naming Walder Frey, naming the price, Warden of the North, lands, legitimacy, naming betrayal not as rumor, but as ink. A low murmur rose, sharp and stunned. Horton Redfort's mouth tightened. "So the leech writes what we always suspected," he muttered. Nestor Royce's eyes narrowed. "And the young wolf lives long enough to make the leech bleed truth," he said. Petyr lifted a hand slightly, calm returning. "Confessions can be forced," he said gently, "written under threat. It proves only that war makes men say what victors want." Anya's gaze snapped to him. "Then you tell me," she said, voice cold, "why you are so eager to pull the Vale's men away from the only force in the Riverlands that is punishing treachery." Petyr's smile warmed again, practiced. "Because I wish to protect Lord Robert Arryn," he said softly. "And because the crown will not forgive the Vale if it keeps riding with a rebel king." "Rebel?" A Vale lord near Anya spat. Lysa's voice rose, thin with panic and conviction braided together. "Robert is afraid," she cried. He cannot, he..." She looked at her son, pleading. "Tell them, sweet boy. Tell them you want your mother. Tell them you want to go home." Robert's throat worked. He looked at Anya Waynwood, who had held him steady without crushing him. He looked at Petyr Baelish, who smiled like safety. He looked at his mother, who wept like love and fear tangled into one. He looked, finally, at the parchment in Anya's hand. A traitor's confession. A story of knives and gold and broken bread. Robert swallowed. His voice came out small. He began. The hall held its breath. Robert's hands shook, but he lifted his chin the way a child did when trying to imitate courage. "I want the Vale safe," he said, words stumbling. "I don't want people to die." Petyr's smile softened, ready to catch the next sentence. Robert's eyes flicked to the flayed man's seal again, and something in him seemed to harden. Not much, not enough to make him brave, but enough to make him stubborn. If we leave," Robert whispered, then the bad men win." His voice trembled. "I don't want the bad men to win." Silence struck the hall like a slap. Petyr's smile froze. Lysa's breath hitched. "Robert," she whispered, shocked, as if her son had spoken a language she did not teach him. Anya Waynwood's eyes softened, just a fraction. "My lord," she said quietly. "That is wisdom." Robert's eyes filled with tears, but he did not look away. "I want them to come home," he whispered. "But not like cowards." The lords shifted. Some faces tightened with shame. Others lifted with fierce relief. Petyr Baelish's eyes narrowed, just slightly. He had misjudged one thing. Even fragile boys sometimes hated being used. And in the Eyrie's cold light, the Vale's recall stopped being certain. It became a fight. Dawn showed Tywin Lannister the cost in clean light. Charred timbers lay scattered where trebuchets had stood. Ropes smoked. A scorpion's frame was twisted like a dead insect. Men moved through the wreckage with grim faces, hauling what could be salvaged, stepping over bodies that had cooled in rain. Tywin walked among them without hurry, hands behind his back, eyes taking inventory. He did not mourn Marbrand with words. He mourned him with calculations. Nearby, Ser Gregor Clegane was led away, black armor streaked with mud and blood. His arm held stiff against his side. His helmet was off, revealing a face like a smashed statue. His eyes were red with rage that had nowhere to go but inward. Tywin did not look at him long. Even monsters were resources, and resources could be replaced. If not in strength, then in terror. A raven arrived. The bird landed on a post beside Tywin's canopy, shook rain from its feathers, and offered its leg like a dagger. The captain took the message, broke the wax, and went pale. He handed it to Ser Kevan Lannister, who read once and swallowed hard, then handed it to Tywin with reluctant hands. Tywin read, Roose Bolton's seal, Roose Bolton's hand, Roose Bolton naming his bargain. Tywin's face did not change, but something in his eyes tightened, the way a man's eyes tightened when a knife slipped in his grip. A confession, Kevan murmured. A weapon, Tywin corrected softly. He looked up across the river at the twins' towers. The boy has learned. Kevan's voice lowered. If this spreads, the North will turn on Bolton, he said. If Bolton falls, our path into the North changes, Tywin said, not ends. A Lannister officer approached, voice tight. My lord, the men are uneasy, he admitted. They say the twins is cursed. They say the gods. Tywin's gaze snapped to him, and the officer fell silent as if struck. Tywin did not argue with superstition. He crushed it with presence. The men will do what they are paid to do, Tywin said, and what they fear not doing. He folded the confession letter with precise fingers. Send word to every lord who matters, he ordered. Call it coerced. Call it lies. Call it Northern Theater. His eyes narrowed. And send word to Petyr Baelish. Kevan's brows lifted. Baelish. Tywin's voice turned colder. If the Vale stays in the Riverlands, I will be fighting wolves with falcon claws, he said. That cannot stand. He glanced toward the far tower where smoke still rose. The twins is stone. Stone can be broken. Alliances can be broken faster. Gregor Clegane's low growl carried as he was led away, like an animal promising it would bite again. Tywin ignored it. He looked at the smoldering ram timbers and made a decision that was not surrender, but adaptation. We continue the siege, he said, but we do not waste men on pride. We probe, we starve, we wait for cracks. Kevan hesitated. And if the boy strikes again? Tywin's mouth tightened slightly. Then we pun. Ish where he cannot shield, he said. His roads, his rear camps, his allies who waver. His eyes narrowed. And we make him choose between holding stone and holding loyalty. Across the river, the twins watched, arrows still knocked, banners still hanging. Tywin returned his gaze to the towers as if he could wear them down by staring. He had failed to end the war in a feast hall. He would not fail to end it with time. They kept Roose Bolton in a cold stone room because warmth felt like kindness, and no one in the twins had appetite for kindness anymore. A single candle burned, its flame bending each time wind found a crack. The light made Roose's face look paler, more carved, as if he were already a corpse practicing stillness. Robb stood over him with the confession letter in hand. The wax seal had been broken and remade a dozen times. Copied, pressed, sent on raven legs into the realm like a plague of truth. You wrote it, Robb said. Roose's gaze lifted, calm. I did, he replied. Catelyn stood near the door, arms wrapped around herself, as if holding her body together could keep her from falling apart. She had watched too many betrayals become history. She did not want another. Yohn Royce stood in shadow like a statue that had learned to breathe. Brynden leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp with contempt. Robb's voice lowered. Why? He asked, and the question sounded almost boyish for a heartbeat. Why did you decide my father's house was worth selling? Roose blinked slowly. Because your father was honorable, he said. And honor is expensive. Catelyn inhaled sharply. He was good. she hissed, and the anger in her voice shook. He was good to you. Roose's eyes slid to her. Goodness does not win wars, he said softly. It loses them beautifully. Robb's hand tightened on the letter. You were ready to kill me today, he said. Under banner, under law. Roose's mouth twitched. You were ready to kill me too, he replied. That is what kings do eventually. They decide who must die so the rest can live. Robb stared at him, and Grey Wind's eyes glinted from the shadows behind, watching as if waiting for permission. A maester waited with ink and wax, uncomfortable, as if the room's cruelty might stain him. His hands were red from scrubbing blood off stone. Robb spoke carefully. There will be judgment, he said. Public, northern lords, river lords,
Vale Vichneses.
He glanced toward Yon. And then your fate is sealed. Roose's calm held, but his bound hands trembled slightly, so small a betrayal of composure that it might have been imagined. My fate was sealed the day I chose, he said. Bryndon's voice was hard. You're afraid, he said, and he sounded almost pleased. You hide it well, leech. Roose looked at him. I am not afraid of dying, he said. I am afraid of dying uselessly. Robb's eyes narrowed. Then be useful, he said. Tell me where your bastard is. The candle flame flickered. Roose's gaze sharpened a fraction. Ramsay Snow, he said quietly. You've heard the name. Robb's jaw clenched. Where? Roose exhaled slowly. In the north, he said. Where you are not. Where news arrives late. Where boys become men in chaos. His eyes held Robb's. You cannot be everywhere, your grace. That is the truth Tywin counts on. Caitlin felt her stomach twist. Winterfell. The north. Home. Robb's voice dropped to a whisper. If you have harmed my brothers, he said, and there was something in the tone that made even Brynden go still. I will not hang you. I will not grant you clean death. Roose's face did not change. Threats, he murmured. You are learning the language. Robb leaned in, close enough that Roose could smell blood and smoke on him. No, Robb said softly. I am remembering the language of wolves. He straightened and turned away because if he stared too long, he feared he would do something that would feel good and ruin him. Behind him, Roose Bolton sat in chains, candlelight trembling on his pale face, and watched the boy he had tried to sell begin to become the kind of king leeches feared. A king who could hate and still plan. Night returned, and with it the old question, how long could stone hold against time? Across the river, Tywin Lannister's campfires burned in dim rows, a patient constellation. The siege had been wounded, not killed. The lion did not flee because his teeth were cracked. He waited until his teeth grew back. On the west bank, torches lined the parapets. Men stood shoulder to shoulder behind shields, their breath fogging, their hands raw. The twins' bridge had become a spine. If it broke, everything behind it bent. Robb stood with Yon Royce and Edmure Tully at the bridge's edge. The three of them looked out at the east bank like men staring at a storm that might never pass. Grey Wind pressed close to Robb's heel, quiet and watchful. The wolf's presence a reminder that the night belonged to hunters too. A rider arrived from the rear at a hard trot. Veil colors, cloak wet, face pinched by cold and urgency. He slid down and held out a parchment sealed in pale wax. The moon and falcon. Beneath it, a smaller seal in trembling impression. Robert Arryn. Caitlin took it first, hands shaking. Robb watched her face as she read, and his stomach tightened. Caitlin swallowed hard. It's not a full recall, she said, voice rough. Robert Arryn, under counsel, orders the Vale's host to remain until the twins is secure. Her eyes flicked upward. He says the Vale will not be remembered as cowards. Robb's breath left him in a slow exhale, half relief, half disbelief. He said that, Robb murmured. Yon Royce's mouth tightened. Not smiling, never that, but something like pride flickered behind his eyes. A fragile lord, he said softly. With a spine after all. Behind them, more hoofbeats approached. A small knot of Vale riders arrived. Men who had begun to turn east with the recall in hand and had turned back again. Their faces were grim. One had a bruised cheek. Another carried a broken strap tied crude around his wrist. "We came back," the lead rider said, voice hoarse. "Petyr Baelish tried to name us traitors in the Eyries yard. Anya Waynwood stood against him." He swallowed. Lord Robert Arryn spoke. Lynn Corbray laughed quietly, delighted. "The boy has bite," he said. "I like him." Edmure's eyes stayed on the far bank. "It won't stop Tywin," he muttered. "No," Robb agreed. His voice was steady now, iron settling. "But it stops the crack from becoming a break." Brynden Tully joined them, rain dripping from his cloak. "Tywin's probing," he warned. "Small boats, quiet ladders. He'll test all night." Robb nodded once. "Then we test him back," he said. He turned his gaze across the river. Somewhere over there, Tywin Lannister was reading Roose Bolton's confession and deciding how many men he could afford to lose before pride became stupidity. Robb Stark had been called a boy king. He had been called a rebel. He had been called dead. Now he stood on a bridge stained by betrayal, with wolf and falcon banners above him and a leech in chains below, and he felt something settle into place that was not hope, not comfort, something harsher. "Resolve." "We hold," Robb said, and the words traveled down the parapet like a command that belonged to the stone itself. "We starve him, we raid him, we bleed him, and when he finally tries to cross," he lifted his sword slightly, not pointing, not boasting, only promising, "we make the river remember." Ravens lifted into the dark sky, wings beating hard, carrying truth and orders and fear to every corner of the realm. Behind them, the twins held its breath. Ahead of them, the lion waited. And between waiting and holding, the war stretched on, no longer ending in one night of music, but grinding toward the kind of victory that only comes when men decide they will not die on someone else's schedule.